Emily Walker was just enjoying a peaceful Sunday BBQ when her HOA president, Karen Bright, tried to slap her with fines for noise and odor violations. Karen, obsessed with control and rules, seemed determined to make Emily's life miserable, turning neighbors against her and piling on relentless threats. But Emily had a secret weapon: her own expertise as a district court judge, which would completely change the course of this suburban showdown. But just wait until you see the shocking twist of this drama and why justice in the end triumphed in the most satisfying way. I was just finishing flipping the burgers on my grill, the smell of sizzling meat and sweet corn filling the air, when I heard the sudden sharp knock on my back door. At first, I thought it might be my neighbor Tim, dropping by with one of his infamous lemon pies, but when I opened the door, I froze. There she was, Karen Bright, HOA president, standing there with that exact expression I've come to recognize over the years, the one that screams she's found someone to target. Her lips were pressed tight, her brow furrowed, and she had that glint in her eye, the one that always precedes a lecture, a complaint, or worse, a fine. "Emily," she started, her tone clipped and precise, like a judge reading a sentence she had memorized long ago. "You're violating our noise and odor rules. I'm forced to issue a fine." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My brain was trying to process what had just happened. Noise? Odor? I looked around at my backyard. The kids were laughing. The grill smoke was drifting lazily into the sky, and the only noise was the faint hum of a lawnmower from a street over. This wasn't some chaotic block party. It was a Sunday afternoon barbecue, and yet here she was treating my little gathering like a criminal operation. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of disbelief and indignation flooding through me. Who did she think she was? The self-appointed ruler of our neighborhood, patrolling backyards and hunting for mistakes? This wasn't a city ordinance being broken. It wasn't a safety violation. It wasn't anything that genuinely harmed anyone. This was just me enjoying a quiet afternoon in my own home. And suddenly, it felt like every bite of my carefully grilled burger had turned bitter. Karen didn't give me a chance to respond. She handed me a clipboard, her nails tapping against it in that impatient rhythm that immediately raises tension. I tried to force a smile, a reflex from years of handling conflict politely, but it faltered halfway. Her eyes bore into mine, unyielding, as if daring me to argue. And the truth is, I wanted to. I wanted to throw back a dozen perfectly reasoned arguments, legal citations ready on the tip of my tongue. But instead, I just stood there, gripping the doorframe, trying to contain the heat rising in my face. The anger started small, a flicker at the edge of my thoughts. But then it grew. It was a storm rolling in fast, shaking my calm like leaves in a sudden wind. This wasn't just bureaucracy. This was personal. Karen's tone, her presence, the sheer audacity of marching up to my backyard and treating me like a lawbreaker. It hit deeper than I expected. My heart pounded, my jaw tightened, and a low, simmering rage began to take hold. It wasn't the kind of anger that made you shout or storm out. It was a focused, determined kind of anger, the kind that makes you start planning. Not revenge exactly, justice. And in that instant, as Karen tapped her pen against the clipboard like a drum of impending doom, I realized something. This wasn't about the noise or the smell. This was about control. And no one, not Karen, not the HOA, not anyone, was going to take control of my Sunday, of my home, of my peace of mind, without a fight. The storm of anger had arrived. It was sharp, consuming, and unrelenting. And it marked the beginning of something I hadn't expected. a confrontation that would turn this ordinary Sunday into a test of boundaries, patience, and the very definition of fairness. After that first confrontation, I thought maybe it would blow over. Or perhaps Karen would see reason, realize she was overreacting, and let it go. I was wrong. She didn't stop, not for a single day. First it was letters, dozens of them arriving in my mailbox with official letterhead, outlining violations I didn't even know existed. Each envelope felt heavier than the last, like a physical weight pressing against my shoulders. I opened one, then another, each one repeating the same rigid language, the same insistence that I was in the wrong. The words on the page felt sharp, deliberate, calculated to unsettle. Then came the threats of lawsuits. Emails followed the letters, terse and formal, implying that if I didn't comply, I could face court action. My stomach twisted each time I read one. This wasn't just about a backyard barbecue anymore. It had become a looming cloud over my life. Every time I stepped outside, I half expected to see her peeking over the fence or whispering to neighbors. My summer, which should have been full of laughter, sun, and the smell of grilled food, was turning into a source of anxiety and unease. Karen even started attempting to sway my neighbors. Friendly greetings became strained as I noticed subtle changes. Polite nods replaced by cautious glances, whispers that seemed to follow me whenever I passed by. I could almost hear the quiet gossip. "Did you hear about Emily? Karen says she's breaking the rules again." I felt like I was being boxed in from every angle. My backyard no longer a place of relaxation, but a stage for tension. The woman I once considered a quirky, slightly overbearing neighbor had transformed into a figure of persistent pressure, a real obstacle to my peace. The emotional strain was mounting. I couldn't relax in my own home. Every sound, every passing car, even the distant bark of a dog made me flinch. My friends noticed the change too. My laughter had dimmed. My easy smiles were replaced with a cautious, guarded demeanor. Simple things like enjoying a quiet cup of coffee on the porch became exercises in vigilance. My home, my sanctuary, felt less like mine and more like a court under scrutiny, each moment shadowed by Karen's relentless watch. What hurt the most was the sense of injustice. I hadn't hurt anyone. I hadn't broken any real law, yet I was being treated as though I had committed a grave offense. The principle of fairness, which I had always believed in, seemed to mock me with every letter, every whispered comment, every tense encounter at the mailbox. I felt small, trapped in a situation that seemed to grow larger and more suffocating with every passing day. And yet, underneath the frustration and anxiety, a quiet spark began to form, a determination, almost imperceptible, that maybe I didn't have to endure this passively. I was being challenged, pushed to my limits. And while it hurt, the very intensity of this pain made me start thinking about ways to reclaim control. The summer I had imagined as carefree had become a crucible, testing my patience, my resolve, and my ability to stand up for myself. By the time I set down the latest letter from Karen, my hands trembling slightly, I realized something. This wasn't going to stop on its own, and neither was I. The stack of letters from Karen sat on my kitchen counter like a silent accusation, each envelope a reminder of the relentless pressure that had been building over the past few weeks. I stared at them, feeling the mix of frustration and exhaustion swirling inside me. For a moment, I let myself sink into the weight of it all. The unfairness, the tension, the creeping sense that my home was no longer a safe place. But then, as I ran my fingers over the edge of the top envelope, a thought struck me, sharp and clarifying. I'm not just a homeowner, I'm a district court judge. I've spent years learning the law, understanding procedure, and seeing justice through countless cases. I've faced conflicts that seemed impossible, navigated rules and regulations that could confuse even the most diligent, and I've found ways to uphold fairness even when it seemed buried under bureaucracy. And now, here I was, in the middle of my own conflict, armed with exactly the tools I had been trained to use. That realization shifted something inside me. The anxiety that had been twisting in my chest slowly began to untangle. What had felt like an unending storm of letters, threats, and whispers now became a challenge I was equipped to handle. Hope replaced the tension. Not naive hope, but the kind that comes from knowledge and preparation. I could turn this around. I could reclaim my space, my peace, my right to enjoy my home without being bullied by someone else's obsession with control. I began to prepare, systematically and deliberately. I organized the letters from Karen, cross-referencing them with HOA rules and California law. I made notes on inconsistencies, highlighted sections where the rules had been misinterpreted, and compiled evidence that would clearly show the overreach. I practiced how I would speak at the meeting, rehearsing calm, precise language that left no room for misinterpretation. I visualized the room, the neighbors, and even Karen herself, seeing the situation play out in my mind with a sense of control and clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. There was a thrill in that preparation, a quiet empowerment. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like the situation was moving from something uncontrollable to something I could actively influence. My fear, the sense of being cornered, started to dissolve. Every note I made, every document I reviewed, every legal precedent I considered became a small victory, a step toward reclaiming authority over my own life. I even allowed myself a small smile, sipping the coffee that had gone cold during my late-night review sessions. This was no longer just about defending against Karen's complaints. It was about standing up for fairness, for reason, and for my own boundaries. I realized that I had been through tougher battles in the courtroom, facing people who had far more at stake and far fewer scruples. If I could navigate those cases, I could navigate this. By the time the day of the HOA meeting arrived, my anxiety had transformed into a cautious optimism. I felt prepared, not just legally, but emotionally. I knew that when I spoke, I would speak with authority and clarity. I would not be cowed by intimidation or petty enforcement of rules. And in that shift, from fear to preparation, from frustration to hope, I recognized something important. Sometimes the hardest part of facing injustice is realizing that you have the power to respond. Finally, I wasn't cornered anymore. I was ready. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and I could feel the tension in the air before I even stepped into the room. The familiar suburban meeting hall, usually quiet and uneventful, had taken on a charged, almost electric atmosphere. Chairs were arranged neatly in rows, and the small crowd of neighbors murmured quietly, exchanging glances that were heavy with curiosity and anticipation. Karen Bright was there, of course, sitting at the front with her clipboard in hand, her posture rigid, her eyes darting around as if daring anyone to challenge her authority. As the meeting began, Karen wasted no time. She opened her notebook, cleared her throat, and started listing the alleged violations once again, her voice precise but dripping with that familiar condescension. The usual buzz of approval from her supporters filled the room, and for a moment, I felt the weight of the weeks of letters, threats, and whispers press down on me. My heart raced, and a flicker of the old anxiety threatened to return. But I had prepared. I had rehearsed, and now it was time to speak. I took a deep breath and stood, letting the calmness settle over me like a shield. "Karen," I began, my voice steady, "as a judge, I'm well-versed in laws and procedures. These claims are illegal under state and HOA regulations, and I demand that they be rescinded immediately." The room went silent. Every eye turned toward me. The air felt as though it had been sucked out, leaving only the weight of the moment. Karen's face went pale, and her hands gripped the edges of her clipboard so tightly that the paper creased. The confident, almost predatory energy she had carried in all our previous encounters seemed to falter, replaced by a subtle panic that was impossible to miss. The HOA members exchanged glances, murmuring quietly among themselves, suddenly aware of the magnitude of the error they had allowed to unfold. I calmly walked through the points I had prepared, the inconsistencies in the claims, the misinterpretations of the rules, and the legal precedents that clearly supported my position. My voice did not waver. It carried both authority and composure. One by one, the objections crumbled under the weight of reason and law. Karen tried to interject, but the clarity and calm of my explanation left no room for argument. By the end of the discussion, there was a unanimous agreement. The fines were nullified, the complaints were withdrawn, and the room exhaled collectively. In that moment, I felt triumph like a rush of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The weeks of stress, fear, and frustration melted into a profound sense of justice restored. But the triumph was more than personal victory. I realized that courage and knowledge, combined with preparation, can protect not only the law, but personal happiness. Standing there, I felt the quiet, proud acknowledgement of my neighbors. Some smiled, others nodded subtly, and I could sense the inspiration in their eyes, the idea that one person, standing firm, could make a difference. As the meeting concluded, I walked out of that hall with a sense of clarity and empowerment I hadn't felt in a long time. My backyard, my home, and my peace of mind were mine again. Karen slouched slightly, her authority diminished, and the room seemed lighter, more open, more just. I understood then that sometimes the courage to speak up, armed with knowledge and calm resolve, can change everything, not just for yourself, but for everyone watching. It was a triumph not only of law, but of perseverance, and as I stepped back into the sunlight, I felt inspired to carry that strength forward into every corner of my life.